A few decades ago, food was simpler. Meals were mostly prepared at home from recognizable ingredients. Obesity was relatively rare, chronic disease rates were far lower, and the average person could eat a normal diet without worrying about long-term health consequences. Today, that reality has quietly vanished. What we now call food has changed dramatically, and not for the better. The proof is visible in our bodies, in our hospitals, and in the explosive rise of diet-related disease. This is one of the most significant, yet under-discussed aspects of our decaying world. By the late 1990s, the very definition of food had shifted. Grocery shelves and restaurant menus became dominated by products that would have been unrecognizable to most people just a generation before. Instead of simple meals made from whole ingredients, daily calories now came from brightly packaged, engineered concoctions, ultra-processed foods assembled in factories and laboratories. According to the Nova classification, these industrial formulations, built from refined starches, seed oils, isolated proteins, artificial flavors, and colorants, now supply about 60% of the calories consumed in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. The same pattern holds across all age groups, with the highest rates among children and low-income families. Behind this transformation is a quiet revolution in the ingredients themselves. High fructose corn syrup, almost absent from the food supply before 1970, surged to a peak of 85.7 pounds per person per year by 1999. Corn sweeteners flooded into sodas, snacks, breads, and condiments, displacing cane sugar and driving down production costs. At the same time, the rise of polyunsaturated seed oils, soybean, canola, and corn replaced traditional fats like butter and lard, pushed by dietary guidelines and the promise of longer shelf life. The result is a food environment saturated with cheap, energy-dense, hyper-palatable products, optimized not for nourishment, but for profit, convenience, and addictive pleasure. Epidemiologists have a term for this, the nutrition transition. It happened so gradually that it felt normal, even inevitable. But the numbers tell a different story. In the span of a single generation, the majority of what people eat became ultra-processed. The Nova system, now the global standard for food classification, defines these products not by their ingredients, but by the degree of industrial alteration, how far they are removed from anything that could be called real food. The United States now stands as a case study. Nearly 3 out of every 5 calories come from ultra-processed foods, a figure that has doubled since the early 1990s. As one leading epidemiologist put it, we are living through an unprecedented experiment. Never before have entire populations relied so heavily on foods that are engineered, not grown or cooked. The consequences are only beginning to unfold. The scale of this dietary engineering is not just a matter of taste or convenience. It is a structural transformation driven by industry, policy, and technological innovation. And it has quietly altered the fabric of daily life, shaping bodies, appetites, and health in ways that are only now becoming visible. The next chapter is written not in marketing slogans or nostalgia, but in the hard numbers of what people actually eat and what that means for the future. In the space of a single generation, the numbers have become impossible to ignore. Obesity, once a rare concern, now defines the health landscape of the United States. National Health and Nutrition Examination survey data show that adult obesity has climbed from just 13% in the early 1960s to over 40% today. This is not a slow drift. It is a threefold surge that has touched every region and demographic. In some states, nearly half of all adults now meet the clinical definition of obesity. Children and teenagers are no longer spared. 2 decades ago, type 2 diabetes in youth was a medical rarity, just 9 cases per 100,000 adolescents in 2002. By 2018, that number had doubled to 18 per 100,000. The CDC confirms a 95% increase in youth type 2 diabetes since the start of the millennium. These are not isolated cases. They are the new normal in pediatric clinics, school nurses' offices, and family homes. The same pattern shows up in youth obesity, which has more than tripled since the early 1990s, with more than 1 in 5 American teenagers now classified as obese. Behind these statistics are stories of families living through the fallout. One parent of a Texas teenager, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at just 14, described the shock of watching his son's energy fade, his grades slip, and his confidence vanish, all within 3 years of shifting from home-cooked dinners to a steady diet of packaged snacks and cafeteria pizza. Medical bills, blood tests, and medication schedules replaced soccer practice and carefree weekends. "We thought this was just how kids eat now," the parent said. "Nobody warned us it could happen this fast." The risks extend far beyond weight. The Nutrinet Santé cohort, tracking nearly 100,000 adults, found that every 10% increase in ultra-processed food calories raises the risk of early death by 35%. This hazard ratio is not a distant warning, it is a daily reality for millions, written into the fabric of rising hospital admissions, shortened lifespans, and lost futures. What was once a gradual drift has become a full-scale epidemic. The proof is everywhere, in the numbers, in the clinics, and in the lives quietly upended by a food system that no longer nourishes but undermines the health of entire generations. In clinical and laboratory settings, the impact of engineered foods emerges at the cellular level. 4 main pathways reveal how ultra-processed foods quietly disrupt health. The first is the manipulation of flavor. Food scientists target the bliss point, the ideal mix of sugar, salt, and fat that triggers powerful dopamine responses in the brain's reward centers. Randomized controlled trials show that people consume up to 30% more when foods reach this sensory peak, regardless of hunger. Brain scans confirm the same pleasure circuits are activated by addictive substances. The second pathway involves the chemistry of cooking oils. When seed oils are heated to 180 to 200 degrees Celsius, toxic aldehydes like 4-AHNE and malondialdehyde form. These molecules bind to proteins and DNA, causing cellular stress and chronic inflammation. Animal and human studies link elevated aldehyde exposure to metabolic dysfunction, vascular injury, and higher risks of heart disease and diabetes. A third threat comes from packaging. Tests on ready-to-eat meals and snacks reveal bisphenol A and S leaching into food at 0.5 to 5 micrograms per serving. Microplastics, now found at concentrations of 10,000 to 100,000 particles per gram in some processed foods, are linked to inflammation, hormone disruption, and mental health issues. Finally, emulsifiers such as carboxymethyl cellulose and polysorbate 80 disrupt the gut's mucus barrier and microbiome. Controlled studies show even 0.5% CMC in the diet alters gut bacteria and increases inflammation within 2 weeks. As one endocrinologist notes, the damage begins at the molecular level, long before symptoms appear. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Supermarkets, once built around butcher counters and fresh produce, now overflow with boxes, bags, and bottles engineered to stand out under fluorescent light. The shift was not just in ingredients, but in how food was packaged, displayed, and sold. Marketing teams studied impulse psychology, perfecting shelf placement and packaging colors to drive split-second decisions. Portion sizes crept upward, with single-serve snacks and drinks quietly doubling in calories over 2 decades. End-cap displays and checkout aisles became battlegrounds for the most addictive, ultra-processed options, making engineered foods nearly impossible to avoid. Policy failed to keep pace. For years, federal dietary guidelines danced around the question of processing, focusing on nutrients instead of the realities of industrial food. Only in the 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines did the language shift, finally warning against highly processed foods and calling for a return to meals built from real, recognizable ingredients. By then, entire generations had grown up assuming that convenience foods were normal, even healthy, if they carried the right health claims or calorie counts. One public health expert, interviewed after the new guidelines were released, put it plainly: "We allowed the food environment to be engineered for profit, not health. The real crisis is that it feels ordinary." The proof plays out in lives shaped by these choices. A woman in her mid-40s, after years of infertility and metabolic struggles, described the shock of learning that her daily diet, low-fat yogurts, protein bars, packaged salads, was built almost entirely from ultra-processed foods. Only after switching to simple home-cooked meals did her health begin to recover. Her story is not rare. It is the silent backdrop to a society that has forgotten what real food even looks like. This is the modern diet's legacy. More than half of daily calories now come from ultra-processed foods, and chronic illness shadows a rising generation. The system profits as bodies weaken. Until we name what's been lost, the decline continues, hidden in plain sight at every meal. Share your thoughts below.